Good morning, everyone. Welcome back. Hope you're all doing well. Fantastic to be with you again. People dialing in from all over Ontario. Fantastic to see, as always. Who'd have known that we would get such a positive thing out of COVID and the lockdown that we've had. So, thank you once again for joining us. Today, we're going to be dealing with boundary disputes, and specifically, what I want to touch on is to give you some advice if you get into one. But more importantly, as a real estate professional, what happens when your client calls you and says, "Hey, I got an issue with my neighbor. What do I do?" And the reason why we think this is such an important topic for you, aside from the fact that it's good to know what to do in these cases. We think that it's a really good reason for understanding what to be able to tell your client is that typically a boundary dispute will happen sometime between when they buy a house and when they sell it. And you're always looking for an opportunity, right, to be able to insert yourself into their lives in a way in which you can provide value um, between the buying and the selling so that you can stay front of mind with them. So for us, not only this is great, is this topic something that can give you some good fodder, some good advice to be able to give your clients, but from a business perspective, it gives you one more thing to be able to engage with your client in between buying and selling, stay front of mind, so that when they do come to the point of selling again, you've provided them value, hopefully fairly recently, and they will give you the call, and you'll be able to turn that into another listing. So good business reasons as well. So let's see, who do we have? Nathan's back, Doug's here, Nick's here, Tammy's here, and a whole bunch more of you. Fantastic. So pleased to see you here. Let me change some screens around here. I'm going to minimize me and maximize the slides because that's what's important. So the topic today is actually entitled Boundary Disputes. Has your neighbor crossed the line? I know, cheeky, right? It's great. I love that one. So let's make a start, shall we? Here's what we're going to cover today. We're going to touch on what a boundary dispute actually is, definition of boundary disputes. We're going to talk about why they happen. It's actually there aren't there aren't a huge variety of reasons why boundary disputes happen. It's fairly consistent why they happen and why you care. Then we're going to talk about the anatomy of a boundary dispute. Specifically, though, we're going to talk about what to do and what not to do. Now, some of you who are online right now have taken the course. There's going to be a little bit of new information here, but this is by no means the full boundary-wise education course on boundary disputes. So, but there are some other aspects to it that we're going to include in here. We're going to talk about the costs, and again, advice you can give your clients around what it costs to really go after somebody in a boundary dispute. The advice you can give your clients and how to avoid them in the first place. And then we'll talk about the Boundary Wise Academy at the end very briefly. Okay, hopefully that's what you guys are here for. And let's make a start. I pulled some great graphics off the internet for this. I love some of this stuff. And you got to wonder when you see a picture, what's the backstory? What's the story behind it? So look, Bob, I've painted my fence. I guess Bob was complaining and somebody with a sense of humor painted the fence. And yeah, it looks like this. So let's talk about what a boundary dispute actually is. Fundamentally speaking, a boundary dispute is a disagreement between neighbors over their rights and duties with respect to adjacent or nearby land, real property. More to the point, it's about a disagreement over where the boundary is. If you both agree where the boundary is, then it's rare that you're going to have a boundary dispute. And what's interesting about boundary disputes is that they can range in severity from something that gives you a mild annoyance with your neighbor. Their trees grow and the branches are overhanging. You don't like them because it causes shade over your garden or drops pine needles or whatever into your pool. Mild annoyance to full-blown legal proceedings. And the one thing that continues to astonish us, we do work all over Ontario at Protect Your Boundaries. At the Boundary Wise Academy, oh, you can't hear me. Can everyone else hear me? My volume's at max as well. At the Boundary Wise Academy, maybe that's a little better, Heather? Tell me if it is. At the Boundary Wise Academy and both at Protect Your Boundaries, we are astonished at how litigious people get over their land, even the tiniest little bits of land when it comes to, say, places like Toronto, and how much they're willing to spend to defend their land rights. It astonishes us what the ends that they will go to. We had one situation a couple of years ago where a gentleman was suing his next door neighbor because the fence that the next door neighbor had built was leaning, the top of it was leaning over a few inches onto this gentleman's property. The fence itself was built on the correct side of the line, but it was just leaning over. So Crazy stuff. We see all kinds of stuff. So we're trying to encapsulate that here today and give you some good information. So yeah, they range in severity from just mild annoyance to full-blown legal proceedings that can take decades to resolve, believe it or not. So here's an example of what actually happens. This is a neighbor building a fence 18 inches over the property line. So why would this happen? Well, it happens because the neighbor thought they knew where the property line was. Let's give them the benefit of the doubt. And they built the fence where they thought the property line was. We came in and we're standing at the rear of the yard here. It's a little overgrown, but you can see that red stake. Can you see that red wooden stake there? Right bang in the middle of the picture. That's actually showing where we put a stake to show where the property line actually is, which vindicated our client. Our client owns the property to the left on which the fence has been built. The fence should not have been built there. It should have been built on the line that stake is on. So these are the kinds of things that happen all the time. So why do they happen, by the way? This picture, not our work. In fact, if you want, you can pay us extra. We'll do this kind of signage on your property line. Not really, but yeah, it's amazing the frustration that people end up getting into, and the means that they go to get their point across. So why do boundary disputes actually happen? Well, it's real basic. It's one reason, really. The root cause is a disagreement between neighbors over the location of the boundary. That's simply it. You and I may live next to each other. I may build a fence on the boundary, or what I believe is the boundary, but you think the boundary is a foot my side of where I think it is, which means you think I've built the fence on your property. The dispute is rooted usually in a misunderstanding of where the boundary is. Now, sometimes people know exactly where the boundary is and they go ahead and build over it anyway. That's a different situation. That happens as well. But the vast majority of boundary disputes occur because the two parties who share the boundary do not agree on where the boundary location actually is. The other reason that we find is that there's a disagreement as to property owners' rights and responsibilities and duties relative to that boundary. And a lot of times we see that with easements, and easements play a big role in boundary disputes. You might know where the boundary is, you might know that there's an easement, but you don't know where the footprint of the easement is. So you're using the land as if it was yours. Your neighbor's saying, hey, no, that's an easement there. You can't use that land. You can't park your car, your RV, your boat, build a shed, build a fence, whatever it is on the easement. So that's another reason why boundary disputes come into play. So why does it happen? How does it happen? How do we see this manifest? So our team at Protect Your Boundaries takes calls all day long, every day, from homeowners who have an issue with their neighbor, who are calling, who are looking for some advice. And we're going to see a huge spike in these calls very soon, because a brand new set of radio ads is going out on AM radio very, very soon. Sports radio and news radio. I think it's next week they start. If you want to hear them, they're really funny. If you want to hear them, find us on Instagram and follow us on Instagram at BoundaryWise, and you'll hear them there. They're really cool. And they actually are promoting BoundaryWise real estate agents. So join that program too. But here's what happens. Here's what we hear over and over again. My neighbor built their fence on my side of the property line. Or my neighbor built their deck or their patio or their driveway on my side of the property line. My neighbor's not respecting the right of way, the easement. My neighbor just cut down my prize roses on my hedge or my tree. Now, those of you who were with us last week will know that trees are slightly different. There's a different complexion to those as the municipality and the province gets involved. But a lot of issues around trees. We do not want our neighbor using the driveway to get to their backyard. Well, maybe there's an easement. Who knows? The addition our neighbor just built is on our property. True story. True story. We had a contractor who called us one day and said, come in and do a stakeout of the property line. So we went and we did the stakeout, and we called him and we said, well, you know that addition you've built, are you sure you want us to do this? He says, yes, because the person I subcontracted this build to, I believe, mismeasured this and has built the addition a few inches over the property line. Take a black marker and mark a line up the addition where the property line is, please. So we did it. It looked quite funny, but it was an issue. These things happen. People mismeasure, even professionals, and build stuff over the property line. My neighbor's new roof's eaves overhang on my property. Remember, The property line is not just a line on the ground. It is a plane that goes technically infinitely into the sky and all the way to the center of the earth. That means that you cannot hang your eaves over the property line. You cannot build something underground, think fence footings, underground, crossing over the property line. That is an encroachment. So these things happen all the time, and these are the kind of ways that they manifest. And it often comes back to not the root cause, but the reason why they flare often comes back to the sale and purchase, which is why this is such an important topic for you. And here's what typically happens. Here's what we see happen. An issue exists, but the listing agent didn't fully represent, say, easements. They didn't fully represent an encroachment, a shed that is over the property. And so the buyer comes in, the buying agent doesn't do their own boundary due diligence. Of course, you all would do this, right? The buying agent doesn't do boundary due diligence, and the buyer, the unsuspecting buyer, buys a property and ends up inheriting this issue. So between the listing agent and the buying agent, you end up in a situation where if neither is doing boundary due diligence, whether it's disclosing on the listing or doing the research on the buying side, you end up with a buyer who inherits a set of potential problems and has to deal with them after the fact. And here's the one thing that we see over and over again, and that is somebody moves into a property, and as soon as they moved in, the next door neighbor comes in and says, get your shed off my property. Get your patio off my property. Get your fence off my property. Get your whatever off my property. To which the buyer says, well, yeah, thanks for the welcome to the neighborhood, but how come this is coming up now? How come you didn't resolve this previously with the previous owner? And the answer usually is, as you probably know, the answer usually is, because I was good friends with the previous owner. Our kids grew up together. We've lived next to each other for 40 years. They were just waiting for somebody new that they didn't have a relationship with to deal with this issue. Happens all the time. On the buying side, do not assume that the listing agent has told you everything. Do not assume that the listing agent even knew everything to be able to tell you. Do your research, do your client a favor, try and help them not buy into some sort of legal problem or a boundary dispute or some sort of nightmare scenario where all of a sudden their dream home has turned into a nightmare. So why do you care? Why do you care? Well, you care because we know from our research that 49% of properties in the Greater Toronto area, and research since has shown this is pretty much across the province, 49% of properties have hidden boundary issues. And we're talking about boundary issues that are of significance. We're not talking about half an inch or an inch of an encroachment. We're talking about something significant that people will go to court over. And the number one trigger for boundary disputes that are just sitting there, just that are lying there, that haven't been dealt with, the number one trigger for those flaring into a full-blown dispute is the sale of a property or the neighboring property. New owners come in, take a look at things with a fresh set of eyes. They don't have any sort of relationship with the owner next door, and they are willing to deal with the situation. Why is this important to you? Well, you're kind of in the hot seat, right? You were part of the transaction, especially on the buying side. And there are high expectations of you, as there should be, right? There are high expectations of you that you have stewarded your client's deal in a way that fits with their use of land and their needs and their desires and their direction to you. And if all of a sudden they find out, having moved in, that there is a whopper of a boundary issue that's about to explode on them, and it's something that maybe could have been found, seen, dealt with beforehand, then yeah, you're in the hot seat. I would suggest that rightly so. I mean, you've been through these, you've done these seminars with us. Some of you are already boundary-wise agents certified. You know exactly how to do this stuff. And so there really isn't an excuse in many cases for missing some of this stuff. And it's that extra level of care that you're able to provide. Here's the other thing. You often get asked for advice. Forget about the sale, the purchase. Now you're 6 months, a year, 5 years into your client owning a property. They call you and say, hey, I've got a boundary dispute with my neighbor. What do I do? And quite often you end up getting dragged in. We've had several situations where agents have called us saying, I've spent a year working with this client. I've helped them go to the city. I've researched this sense of guilt, this sense of service that you guys have, which is commendable, wanting to help your clients. But you don't want to get dragged in. You don't have to get dragged in. And what we also know is that title insurance claims are at an all-time high. They're not coming down. Things aren't getting better. And Realtors are targets, legitimate targets of the title insurers as they make an effort to run an efficient, cost-effective business and look to recoup some of their costs. And there's a whole other series that we deal with in the Boundary Wise Academy. But understand that the days of you just being able to walk away, turn a blind eye, willful blindness, I think they're over. I think that those days are coming to an end, and phenomenal realtors who do great due diligence are going to be the ones who survive through this. And this is one of those areas that you can really shine for your clients in. So here's another example. This is one of our clients, and this is sort of the end result. Those of you who've taken the Academy courses will know how this slide builds, but new couple move into the right-hand property where the vehicle is and go to the next door, and they bought a survey from us. Actually, their realtor bought a survey from us as a gift to them when they closed. Fantastic gift. But what we are talking about here is a situation where they went to they knew where the fence was, they knew where the boundary was, they went to the neighbor to the left and said, hey, we're going to move our fence, careful on the language, our fence onto the property line, to which the next door neighbor said, absolutely not. The fence is on the property line. I've lived here for 50 years, built it with my neighbor, blah, 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 blah. To which the new neighbors next door, where the car is, said, I got a survey plan here. It shows clearly that the fence is not on the property line. Anyway, stakeout was done. Those orange stakes in the ground show where the boundary is. It's exactly where the survey said. And this wasn't a particularly pleasant way for them to start their experience together. But in this case, it wasn't the new homeowners who were at fault. They did everything right, and their agent helped them. It's the fact that the next door neighbor was misinformed, believed the boundary to be somewhere else. You see, again, the reason for it, there's a misunderstanding or disagreement as to where the boundary is. Eventually it got resolved, but it wasn't a particularly pleasant way to go about it. So how to resolve a boundary dispute. We're not going to go into a ton of detail here. We'll leave that for the Academy in that course. But what I want to just share with you is that there are things that you can do that work. And there are things that most people end up doing that simply don't work. So as you offer your client advice, keep this in mind. Do this first and foremost. Before you start ranting and raving and calling people and getting help, and make sure you know where the boundary is. Because you may be wrong. 50% chance you're wrong. Always 50% chance you're wrong. Just assume that you may be incorrect. Get a surveyor to do a survey or a stakeout of the boundary line to determine where that boundary is. If it's a highly contentious issue, do not just rely on an existing survey and taking the measurements yourself. Now you can start with that. Get a survey from us at protectyourboundaries.ca, an existing survey, $200, $300, $400, not a huge expense. And if it shows the dimensions, the ties, as we've seen in another webinar, and you've got a decent relationship with your neighbor, maybe you purchase the plan, go to your neighbor, say, look, here are the measurements, let's measure it out together and see what we think. Sometimes that's enough. And your neighbor might say, oh my goodness, yes, you're right. This does seem right. And maybe you'll have to make a call to a survey and just to confirm that you've done it correctly. But sometimes that's enough. You might get the survey and go, oh my goodness, I was completely wrong. Neighbor was right. And all of a sudden you can de-escalate. That is the least expensive way to resolve a boundary dispute, is just to, first of all, get an existing survey, do some approximate measurements, and see if see which of you is incorrect over it. Now, many times it's quite precise, and the margins are very, very small in terms of distances, measurements, and so on that you're dealing with, and you can't do an approximation. It's not for you to do. You need to get a professional involved. So get a surveyor to come in, get us or one of the other great survey firms in Ontario, get us in and let us do a boundary stakeout or a full survey that shows you precisely where that boundary is. And then there's no ambiguity, because as you know, surveyors are the only professionals out there who are legally, who have the legal right to be able to provide an opinion on where the boundary is. Everyone who has anything to do with boundaries or needs any information to do with boundaries has to rely on an Ontario land surveyor for that. So you start off by confirming with documentation where the boundary is. Once you've done that, if you still think you're in the right and your neighbor's not listening, well, try and resolve it with your neighbor. Continue to try and resolve it with your neighbor, because the alternative is expensive. It's painful sometimes to have conversations with somebody who's being adversarial, who's not being particularly nice to you, who's not listening to you. It's difficult. But if you can get through that process, it's worth it. So your advice to your client is try and resolve it with your neighbor. If you've got the documentation, try. If that doesn't work, unfortunately, your next level of escalation is pretty severe. You got to hire a lawyer, and not a real estate lawyer who does real estate deals unless they have a particular specialty in land disputes. You're looking for a litigation lawyer, one that has expertise in land law. Or walk away. Sometimes you just want to walk away from something. A situation is such that you believe that pursuing the outcome that you want is going to have so much collateral damage that you may end up with some sort of Pyrrhic victory where the end result, even though you win, just wasn't worth what you lost along the way. And that means stress, it means relationships, it means time, it means money, just not worth it. So strategically speaking, sometimes walking away, just leaving it, is worth it. Now, if it is a situation like that, and you've got a situation where your next door neighbor you believe you know is encroaching on your property, but they just won't remove the offending item, the offending encroachment, you might want to try and get it in writing, get it documented so that when you sell the property, you're able to at least document that and disclose it. Lots of nuances, lots of details here around title insurance and all those things. We're not covering those today. We're just going to get through this information, okay? But here's what you don't do. You do not try to get free help from the city. They don't care. From the police, it's not a boundary issue, is not a criminal matter. Your MP, well, unless you made a sizable contribution to their election fund, I don't know. Or a surveyor. Free advice, you get exactly what you pay for. Absolutely nothing. The city, for the most part, considers boundary issues civil matters. It's up to you to resolve. The only time they may get involved is they certainly will get involved if it's a dispute with city property over city property. But if it's neighbor to neighbor, the majority of municipalities simply say, this is a civil matter, you deal with it. There are some municipalities, I think Oakville is one, that actually has a department, a function that helps guide you through those. But for the most part, the vast majority of municipalities do not have any sort of mechanism. They pass it off as a civil matter. Same with the police. Unless a criminal offense has been perpetrated, the police are not interested. It's a civil matter. Now, when your client is speaking to you, you've got to be careful on this one. When your client is speaking to you, I don't think it's a good idea for you or us or me to make a determination for the client as to whether or not the police should be involved. I would suggest that the information you impart to your client is one of, listen, it's probably not a police matter, but if you think that there's something criminal that's happened here, please give them a call and confirm. So don't make a determination. We had one situation to protect your boundaries where there were some pretty severe verbal threats and some physical abuse that was happening over a boundary dispute, in which case, absolutely, the police should get involved with something like that. But technically, from a boundary dispute issue, your fence is encroaching on my property. I've built my pool over your property. That's not a criminal matter. The police don't care about that. Your MP, I guess you could try, but it's not going to help. And calling a surveyor for free advice, please don't do that to us. It's like calling realtors. It's like calling you guys for free all the time. Tell your clients, get a surveyor, pay them to come in and do what they have to do to tell you where the boundary is. Now, in all of this, those of you who were with us last week when we talked about trees will know that trees behave somewhat differently. Well, our behavior towards trees is slightly different. And specifically, what we know when we're dealing with a boundary tree, we know that trees are sometimes dealt differently by municipalities because the province and the municipality have take on a certain amount of responsibility for the protection of trees in the municipality, for protection of the urban forest. We know that municipalities have very strict rules as to how you deal with trees. Even if it's completely on your land, removing it, you can't just do that in most municipalities. If you have an issue, a boundary dispute over a tree, that is not going to be particularly, that's going to be affected by the municipality. So check out the tree webinar on YouTube for more information on that. Okay, so let's move on. We're almost there, guys. Our 30 minutes is up. Remedies and costs. I want to keep this simple. The Boundary Wise Academy has a lot more detail on this, but I want to try and keep this simple. The message is this. if you want to go legal on this, if you want to lawyer up and get litigious, it's going to cost you a fortune. It's going to cost you an absolute fortune to do. Now, unless you can get just a nasty letter written by a lawyer, and that scares the neighbor enough to take action, fine. But that's still going to cost you a couple of $1,000s to do. The point is, if you make a title insurance claim, if it falls under the purview of your title insurance policy, fine. But please tell your client, hire a lawyer to make that claim. Hire a lawyer who specializes in title insurance claims to make that claim for you. Try and get your client to not do it themselves, because at the end of the day, they may not get everything that's coming to them, everything that's owing to them. If you go through the process of a Land Titles or Boundaries Act process, or if you go through legal proceedings in court, we're talking tens of thousands, sometimes hundreds of thousands of dollars that can take 5 years, 10 years, sometimes 20 years to resolve. And know that if it's a point of extreme contention, if it's highly litigious and there's a lot of contention around it, it doesn't just stop at the first ruling. It then goes to appeal, and then further appeal, and then further appeal. We've seen some cases, and those of you who've done the academy will see some cases that have gone on for years and have just gone back to court over and over and over again. And the cost of litigating ends up outweighing the value of the land being disputed by 5, 10, 20, 50 times. Sometimes people just have a point to make and they want to throw money at it. Your advice to your client is, when you say, I'm going to hire a lawyer, we're coming after you, tell them, just before you do that, understand that this is a very complicated, expensive, and a process that's going to take a long time. You may want to rethink that. Here's a great example. I love this example. Our client is standing on the left. I don't know why our clients always look so dejected. They're always standing there with their shoulders down when we take pictures. It's probably because we've given them either bad news or not the news that they were expecting. That's not because we don't do good work. We do great work. It's just not always what they were expecting. So our client here, you can see his garage is in the back there. And the next door neighbor here, there's a fence almost, it's right up against, it's 3 inches away from their wall. And so how on earth did this happen? Well, what happened was that our client believed that they had a right. When they bought the house, they were told they had a right to use the driveway, the full width of the driveway. But in actual fact, they had an easement over that portion that went all, the boundary was somewhere between the houses, and they had an easement all the way up to the wall. My goodness, what a terrible explanation that was given to him by the listing realtor and not confirmed by the buying realtor. The next door neighbor got fed up with these folks using it almost exclusively to get to the back, open the doors, kids unloading, junk all over the driveway, that he said, you know what, you're not listening to me. You're not understanding the way things are. I'm going to build a fence on the boundary because there is no easement. Our client said, you're wrong. There is an easement. I was told there is. Look, I have to get to my back. So the next door neighbor built this fence. The next door neighbor built this fence, and our client on the left came to us and said, please come and tell me that this fence is not right. So we went, and the good news is you don't often see a fence that's built absolutely perfectly on the property line. The bad news is this was a perfect fence right on the property line. The next door neighbor did something that's completely within his rights to do. I'm not sure what value he got other to make a point. That's a very expensive point he made. But nonetheless, our neighbor's standing there going, oh dear, he was right. How do I get my car to the back now? So an interesting situation here that transpired. We're going to get to some questions in a second if you have any, okay? Off the internet, of course. It's a wonderful thing, the internet, right? You stole my land. I guess the point is people go to all kinds of lengths. When they've run out of options, they go to all kinds of lengths to make their point, right? Best advice. This is it, guys. Your client is in a boundary dispute and they're calling you. You want to give good, useful advice. You don't want to get dragged in. Your best advice is, first of all, try as hard as you can to resolve this between yourselves. Get a surveyor involved to confirm the boundary locations. If it's to do with a tree, remember last webinar, if it's to do with a tree, get an arborist to mark where the root collar and tree collar and branch collar is for the surveyor to mark those on the survey plan, right? Add that if it's a tree thing. Get a survey. If you cannot resolve it, you have two other options. The one is full-blown escalation, hire a lawyer, get a lawyer involved. $500 an hour, $5,000 minimum, guys. It's not going to be less than that. Or choose to walk away. choose to make a strategic choice to walk away and live to fight another day. Don't go after that Pyrrhic victory. It may not be worth it for you in the long term. So that's it, guys. That's it for today. 30 minutes on the nose. Boundary Wise Academy. Was this useful? If it was, please join us at the Boundary Wise Academy. We have hundreds of agents across Ontario who are already certified. They have the CBW, Certified Boundary Wise Professional Accreditation. They're using it. Again, radio ads are hitting next week. You're going to get a lot of traction on this. Join us because you get, this is an exclusive course for Ontario Realtors. 8 courses not taught by OREA or RICO or the New Humber program. This is leveling up. This is a significant upgrade in the quality and nature and currency of the information, much of which isn't even taught to you as realtors. Don't understand why. It should be. We're doing it. It's 7 to 10 hours of video training with course notes. It's kind of fun, I guess. Nathan, is it fun? I think it is, right? Quizzes through and exams. The exams are tough. You've got to get 80%. You can retake. We tell you where to go back to and get the information again. But trust me when I tell you, this is not something you can watch Netflix and press the space bar on to get through. You got to focus. You're going to learn something. You're going to learn some good stuff here. You get knowledge, you get tools and resources, you get process. But a bit like what we've done today. If you've been watching our webinars, understand that this does not represent the entirety of what we teach. There's a lot more in there and a lot more ongoing information that you can access at boundarywise.ca. What do you get? I want to focus on the first 2 things here. First of all, you get the professional designation, CBW, Certified Boundary Wise. You add that on your business card. You add the logo to your website. You even get a nice little pin like you see here that you can wear if you choose. I got a sticker on my car, whatever. The point is it's a professional designation. And we know from what Aria said earlier this year, pre-COVID, which feels like a century ago, credentials matter, guys. Credentials matter. And especially in an oversaturated market where there isn't a lot of business, you're competing hard, credentials matter. Be that professional that you always strive to be at this. You also get hotline support for a year. What does that mean? That means right now, if you're not a Boundary Wise member, you call us for advice or help, we're going to charge you $150 minimum as a consultation fee every time. If you are a Boundary Wise graduate, you get that for free, unlimited for an entire year. Call us as many times as you want, every single deal. Just call us. We'll help you out for free. It's part of the academy. It's part of this professional designation. Finally, you're going to generate more leads. We're running very expensive radio ads right now to get you more leads. You're going to get more leads. You're going to win more listings because you're going to go in and compete against other agents who don't have this level of knowledge and understanding. You're going to protect that higher commission rate. We know there's an enormous amount of downward pressure on your commissions right now. This is something you can add, an arrow you can add to your quiver of value that says, hey, this is why you pay me. This is why I'm worth it. And guys, you are worth it. If you've got this credential and the other credentials that are out there, you are worth it. And you get to complete safer deals, which is good for you, your career, your client, and your referral business. So come on over to boundarywise.ca. We want to see you there. And well, let's see you online. If this was valuable to you, do the like thing, do the subscribe thing in YouTube, all this fancy technology. Come see us on Instagram. Join up on there. See all our posts on there, and leave us a couple of reviews if you would. But most importantly, come over to boundarywise.ca. Check us out. I'm going to deal with a couple of questions here. So, Nathan, thank you. It's a very good investment as a realtor, land, home owner. Fantastic. Thank you. Cost, thank you, Heather. It's $350 for not each course. The entire thing is $350. Good morning from Victoria. How can I get last week's talk? Go to YouTube, go to our channel, subscribe. It's in there, and you'll find it. And I think that was it for questions. Any other questions? I think we'll do. I think this does for the week. And it was great to be with you. Enjoy the wonderful weather. I'm off for the next 2 weeks. We're going to take a break, and we're going to come back because we're finding new content. We're looking at riparian rights. We're looking at cottage issues, waterfronts. We're looking at all kinds of other different aspects of adverse possession. Some really great topics that we're studying, that we're researching, that we're going to bring to you. If you have any suggestions, let us know. Heather says, do you have to take it every year? No, you don't have to take it every year. We continue to add videos and courses, but you don't have to take the exams every year. There is an ongoing $100 fee every year afterwards. So yeah, it's a tiny investment for you. for some real value. And you get to hang out with me once in a while on my team. I've got a fantastic team. So, all right, guys, leave you to it. Have a great day. Stay positive. Stay productive. Go and have some fun in the marketplace. And we will see you next time. Take care, everyone. Bye for now.